Alright, I want to make a long-term, ultimate, detailed review about this Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36mm in black. It's reference number 116000. Quick specs on this is 36mm in diameter. It's got a black dial, thickness of 12mm, and a lug-to-lug of 44mm. In this review, I'm going to talk about how I ended up with this watch, why I bought it, and my impressions of it. And the second portion, I'm going to talk about a detailed review of, everything from the crystal to the dimensions of the crystal to the dimensions of the crown. I'm going to do as much detail as I can about the actual watch. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about why this watch is personally important to me and the personal story behind this watch and how I ended up with it and what it means to me. All right, to start out with, first and foremost, when I was I wasn't particularly looking to buy a Rolex. This was actually my first Rolex, my only Rolex, and most probably my last Rolex. And so that should go to show what kind of watch buyer I am. I'm not particularly a Rolex fan. I was set out to buy a watch that, ticked a certain amount of boxes. I was looking for something that was timeless, had a black dial. It could just be my one and done timepiece. I do have a collection, but if I could only have one watch, that would be it. I wanted it to have an automatic movement. I wanted it to be 36mm in diameter, have a sapphire crystal, a screw down crown, plus or minus date. I was on the fence about that, but I could have went either way depending on how it was implemented onto the dial. Obviously, you can see I went with no date, which is okay with me. I wanted to have a pleasant dial with a proportionate layout. We'll get into that more about this watch. I think this is a proportion monster, meaning I believe every single proportion on this watch in terms of markers, distances, hands, dimensions are literally perfect. I wouldn't change anything. I also wanted it to have excellent reliability, be from a very reputable brand, and to be, as I mentioned, timeless. Honestly, I was looking towards Seiko to check all those boxes, and I did have trouble. Seiko 5 does come pretty close, but it didn't have that extra level of refinement that I was looking for. So I didn't particularly look to Rolex to fulfill this, and this was back up, think about 2017, and I was largely familiar with the entire Rolex lineup, but not until 2018 or late 2017 did they actually release the black dial Oyster Perpetual. The only black dial watches that were in the lineup at that point were, I believe, the Air King and the Explorer in 36mm. And the Explorer checks all those boxes, but I am not a fan of the 369 on the hour markers. As you can see, I went with the batons. I believe they did have a Oyster Perpetual available in blue, but again, I think that had the 369. And so I had been browsing their website, and I found that they had released a black dial with double batons. Another thing that was a requirement to me was that the 369 locations for the hour markers were easily distinguishable from the other hour markers, and as you can see, you have double ticks here, or double batons, so it's very easy to distinguish. And so this actually, believe it or not, checked all the boxes, and up to that point I had never owned a Rolex, and largely because I didn't think they were, quote, worth it, which sounds ridiculous to say in 2023. But back then, I really didn't think they were worth it, and there weren't as many value. But it was black, and I liked what it looked like. It checked all the boxes. I didn't buy it because it was a Rolex. I bought it because it fulfilled all of my requirements. And as Jack Foster from Hodinkee, when he was reviewing this particular watch, except in white, he said something very interesting. He said it's a watch first and a Rolex second. And I think that is absolutely the best way to describe this watch. It's a watch first and a Rolex second. And it was, in retrospect, it was kind of a reckless purchase. I bought it sight unseen. I bought it online. Wholly expected not to be too excited or too thrilled about it. I didn't expect it to be as nice as it turned out to be. and which is very interesting. I also didn't know too much about the movement, the watch itself, and only after I have owned it for only after I had owned it for 6 months to a year, I really came to appreciate the quality, the design choices, the proportions, the bracelet, how it wore on my wrist, the balance, everything about it just kept impressing me more and more and more. And then when I compared it to against other watches in my collection, I have Omegas, three Grand Seikos, Seiko Divers, and multiple Seiko 5s. When I compared it to all those watches, this came out on top. And if I could only have one watch of all of them, other than my G-Shock, this would be it. And so I think this is why I'm making this ultra detailed review on this watch. I think it's a spectacular watch. One of my requirements was I wanted it to be loomed as well, and this has fantastic loom. I'll get into that as well. So this became, as I mentioned, my number one watch, and it is hands down my favorite watch, and it's probably also one of my most comfortable as well. It's a watch first and a Rolex second. It's a watch I would choose regardless of whether it had the coronet or the crown on top, and it happens to do so. That I think that speaks volumes to their quality and design. Alright, now I'm going to talk in detail about all of the dimensions on this watch of everything I've mentioned. So case width is 36 millimeters, lug to lug is 44 millimeters, lug width is 20 millimeters, the case thickness is 12 millimeters, the bend, so where these flex, is 42 millimeters. As I mentioned, the case lug to lug is 44 millimeters, and then it bends actually at 42. Spring bar to spring bar is 38 millimeters. The crown size is actually 6 millimeters. Bezel from here to here is the bezel width is 35 millimeters from bezel edge to bezel edge. Sapphire crystal width is diameter is 30 millimeters, and that pretty much sums up all the dimensions. I can talk about the bracelet as well. The bracelet here is 20 millimeters, and then it tapers all the way down to 15.5 millimeters. The clasp itself is 18 millimeters thick. Okay, and so I think those are as much as I can tell you regarding the dimensions. So let's start. Now when I'm talking in detail about the watch itself, I'm going to start from crystal and go all the way down, just traveling down through the watch. So here, starting with the crystal, there's a lot to be actually said about the crystal. The crystal is made out of sapphire. It is has a Rolex logo etched into the actual crystal itself. It's very difficult to see, I guess, mark authenticity, but it's actually in the crystal down at the 6 o'clock portion. If you look at it just correctly with the light, you can see the Rolex symbol, logo, crown symbol etched into the actual crystal. The crystal itself is proud to the bezel, as you can see there, and it gives this sort of glow as it reflects the light, which is, I find, really neat, and people don't really review that. When this is all in the dark, is loomed up, the loom spills into the edge, and it'll light up the edges of the crystal, which I think is really cool. As I mentioned, the crystal is 30 millimeters in diameter. The edge on the crystal, as you can see here, is also kind of angled, so it's smooth with the bezel. It's almost like a trapezoid-like edge. It's a press fit crystal. These crystals did used to be actually screwed, when they were back in the day when they were acrylic, they were screwed in by the fluted bezel. That's why they used to have those fluted bezels on these Rolex watches. They'd screw down and hold the crystal in place to make a watertight fit. That's no longer done. This crystal does not have any AR coating on it, so no anti-reflective coating. Some other Rolex models actually do. I thought no Rolexes did, but an authorized dealer corrected me when I had said that. He said, no, some of them do, and they do. This one does not have any AR coating, I believe. All right, moving on to the bezel. The bezel itself is rounded, as you can see here. It's not a flat bezel like it is on the Explorer. This is a rounded, curved bezel, which I really like. I think I like a flat maybe a little bit better, but this one is rounded. It's 35 millimeters edge to edge, and then the internal diameter of the bezel would be 30 millimeters, same as the crystal. Now moving on to inside the watch itself, you can see the rehaut. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, it is right there. The rehaut in this one is nice and steep. It is angled. It has Rolex written 5 times on the left side and then 5 times on the right side. And then at the tip, there's a crown laser etched into the rehaut as well, which is part of the case. So, and then at the 6 o'clock portion, there's a serial number. So it's Rolex 5 times on the left, Rolex 5 times on the right, and then all laser etched, as well as a crown up there etched in, and I think that's a very nice touch. If you look closely, you can see it's very subtle. From arm's length distance, it's kind of hard to make out, but when you look up close, it's a nice touch. Now moving on to the second hand, so going further in, second hand is made out of white gold. It is of excellent length, and like I said, this Rolex is a proportion monster. And so the second hand reaches right out to the minute track. It doesn't spill into the minute track. It's right at where the minute markers start. And it's further out than the hour markers. And so, again, proportion monster is like perfectly done. What else can I say about the second hand? It is tapers. It's like a needle type of second hand. It's thicker at the edge and tapers out to the point. Hours are a minute hand. The minute hand are batons. Its length goes right out to the hour marker. It's just maybe half a millimeter longer than the edge of the hour marker. And the minute hand is loomed. It is also made out of white gold as well. The minute hand is obviously thicker than the second hand, but it's thinner than the hour's hand. Now moving on to the hour's hand. The hour's hand is also baton. It's made out of white gold. Its length reaches short of the hour markers, as you can see there. Moving on to the hour markers themselves. The hour markers are made out of white gold, as is the applied logo at the 12 o'clock, the Rolex logo at the 12 o'clock portion. Now, these are not actually individual sticks here. This is one piece. These 369 are one piece, but it looks like they're 2 sticks right next to each other, but they're actually not. If you look right there is just one block. Hope you can see that. When you can't really tell unless you look at it like that, and so it's very easy to look at this watch as a glance. Look at this watch at a glance and distinguish between the 369 and the other minute markers. And I love the symmetry that this watch gives due to that. One other thing is when this is when it's dark and all these are loomed, obviously the logo is not loomed, so it's very, very easy to see or get the orientation, because you know there is no loom at the 12 o'clock marker, so the orientation is very easy to tell in complete darkness. Also, how the loom is filled in these hour markers is fantastic. Sometimes when you look at watches and you see the loom, it's kind of like a blob that's dried or bubbled up. Nope, not on these. The hour markers are made out of white gold. It's flat and flush at top where the loom has been filled, and it's very tastefully done. Every hour marker has highly polished facets that reflect very nicely, and one thing I found extremely impressive about these hour markers is when there's this light is being shined and it reflects off of the watch onto the wall. That's a time where any issues with alignment or deviation would be easy to pick up. It reflects it exactly perfectly against the wall. Every single hour marker is reflects light proportionally, and it's even, which I was like astonished, because that just goes to show that the placement of the hour markers is pretty much perfect, because it would only be amplified or magnified when light has reflected off of it. Moving on to the dial itself. And so the dial is a black sunburst dial, and I think there are other options for design, and so there could be a glossy dial, there could be a matte dial. I'm not particularly fond of glossy dials on a non-dress watch, and I mean, this is, you can wear this in dressy circumstances, but I believe this is more of a sports or everyday watch. I find the glossy dials distracting. The sunburst dial is mute when it needs to be, and then when it reflects light, it kind of runs around. It's fun to actually look at the sunburst dial on this watch. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there, and it's pleasing to see. Moving on to other dial features, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Superlative Chronometer, officially certified, all of that has been printed on, as well as the minutes track. Now, one thing I want to point out about this minutes track is what I absolutely love is that the current offering of this watch by Rolex doesn't have a minutes track. It has a minutes track, but it doesn't have the digits at every hour marker. It has white blocks, and I don't like that on the new ones. I find it slightly redundant with the double stick batons. It looks like there's a stick and then a dot, a stick and then a dot. Instead, I find the minutes, the printed minute track, extremely technical and very cool. And one other feature I really like is that the orientation of the minutes on the minutes track are not corrected. The orientation is left upside down all the way around. It seems a lot more technical to me. It makes a lot more sense. I'm sorry. This case is made out of Rolex's 904L stainless steel, and it's got a certain color to it that really matches the white gold that they use for the hands, hour markers, and the applied logo. The luster of the metal really matches that of the steel itself. And another thing to say about the case is it's nicely curved. It's well refined. And all right, let's move on and talk about the crown. This crown is a screw-down crown. It's a twin lock system where there's a gasket. There are two gaskets internally. There's actually a third gasket from where this crown stem itself. The stem screws into the case. There's a third gasket in there between the crown and the case. And so this is a fantastic design, and it stood the test of time, and I think Rolex did a really good job with that. As I mentioned, the crown itself is 6 millimeters in size. I do like that there are no crown lugs or crown guards. It gives it a more streamlined appearance, and it goes along with these overall timeless look. The bezel does overhang the bezel does overhang these edge where the one thing I do want to do is take a step back and talk about the lume again. The lume on this particular watch is Superluminova, which is not Rolex's in-house lume concoction. It's actually, and I believe the Superluminova, from what I've seen online, is superior to Chromolite, and this actually has Superluminova, and which I think is fantastic. It's a superior lume. I don't care that it was or wasn't Rolex's in-house lume. I just care about the performance. All right, now we cannot talk about this watch in completion without mentioning the movement that this watch uses. This watch uses the 3130 movement, which is highly respected and highly regarded by watchsmiths and watch repairers for its serviceability, its thought to design, its reliability. 3130 is probably one of the best movements that Rolex has ever made. This does have the updated parachrome blue hairspring in there, but it does not have the Paraflex shock absorber that was included in the 3132 that was utilized in the Explorer models. It's 3130, and it stood the test of time. I think it was released back in the 70s, and it's still used through a large portion of 20 up to, like, I believe 2020. Only recently has the 3230s, I believe, replaced the 3130s. And so I really like the movement of choice that was included in here. The movement itself is a 28,800 beats per hour movement, which is 4 hertz or 8 beats per second, and it gives a nice smoother sweep to the seconds hand, as you can see there, which I also appreciate. My particular watch does run within COSC. Now, moving on to the bracelet. The bracelet itself is secured with solid end links. If you take these out, they're not actually fully solid, but they are, I believe, machined. They're solid enough. There's a slight C-channel cut through the end links. I don't know why, but they're, for all intents and purposes, they are solid. They're not folded or stamped metal. The links themselves are also the same way. They're not stamped metal. If you see these screws, the links are held in by these screws. If you unscrew them, it's just the end portion that's threaded. And I think that's was it either the end portion or the portion closest to the screw head is threaded. And I think that's a fantastic way to secure the links as opposed to pins or pins and collars. I was never a super big fan of that. Now, the clasp itself is milled. As I mentioned, the bracelets, they're 20 millimeters up here, tapers down to 15.5 millimeters, and the clasp itself is 18 millimeters wide. This does not have the micro adjustment mechanism, which doesn't bother me. I've never found that I needed to use it. One other thing about this clasp is that there are some welds on here, believe it or not. This link right here is actually welded to this portion, and it's such a nice job of welding, you can't even tell, but it is in fact welded down there. And so is this piece. This clasp hook right there is welded as well, and hard to tell, but there it is. There's the weld. There are tiny welds right here and right here. The clasp itself is super comfortable, super smooth. All these edges are super well rounded and never pinch my skin or pull hairs. And so it lends itself to being super comfortable. Clasp is super secure. Initially I was like, this doesn't have that double securing method. I know it doesn't bother me in the least bit. In fact, I like this one because it's easier to take on and off. We'll just clip and pop it off. And so I really like the deployment and the clasp mechanism. Alright, the only couple more things about the clasp is that these are all milled pieces of metal, or they're full thickness metal. They're like stamped. They're not stamped pieces of metal, which gives this clasp a really solid feel. Alright, lastly I want to talk about why this watch has particularly special meaning to me. This watch I acquired at a time where I was changing jobs and at a time where my son was born. I moved from one job to another. I was still new to the work life and work industry, and the last bonus of mine wasn't paid out to me, which I noticed about a few months later after I left my previous job and went to the new one. It was pretty well written in my contract that I was supposed to get it, and I had reached out to them to give me that bonus, and they kind of gave me runaround, said no, and that I had to be employed at the time I was going to receive the bonus. And after a few back and forths, I knew I was right because of how it was worded in my contract, so I just called the CEO, and sure enough, it was paid out within a month. And the bonus was just about the exact same price of this watch. So this watch kind of goes to remind me for self-advocacy and doing the thing that's right, in which those guys ended up doing for me, and staying true to myself, self-advocacy, and always doing the right thing. And I believe they did, and as a result I was able to purchase this. And also my son was born, this would be exactly about his birth year model, and I purchased this within the first year of my son being born. So this will probably eventually end up being his, and I hope it helps him remember, that it was mine. I'll probably tell him the same story about doing the thing that's right and self-advocacy and how I came about owning this particular watch. So it has a lot of meaning to me as well, and I hope to share that with my son, and then he'll be his eventually. Alright, thanks for watching.